Last week, you've done it with different conferences, but you had your look at each team in the SEC's most important conference game for this fall. You had Tennessee's most important conference game September 30th against South Carolina. Swain and I had South Carolina. We had a debate, South Carolina versus Florida, in the can't-lose conversation. So I wonder if this is part of that. Why South Carolina is the most important conference game for Tennessee?
Yeah, and there's been some debate amongst various fan bases about kind of how I put this together. And I think part of the issue is that, some folks just not exactly understanding the exercise of the process. It's not necessarily the biggest game of the season. I think we'd agree Tennessee, Georgia in November would probably be the biggest game for the Vols next year, or even going to Alabama, trying to win back-to-back over the Tide. I just think where the South Carolina game fits on Tennessee's schedule with what they have, kind of going into that, A&M, Alabama, Kentucky stretch following that. I kind of agree with you guys. I think that and Florida, they're not must win, so to speak, because every game is supposed to be a W, when you're a team that, has college football playoff hopes. But I do think that's a big spot on the schedule, and then you consider what happened in last year's game where, Tennessee kind of no-showed in Columbia and just got completely housed, and it, spoiled an otherwise pretty magical season for the Vols.
How do you judge, rank the quarterbacks returning in the SEC? A lot of transfers. Then you have a guy like Joe Milton that really 2 games as a starter in the last year or so, and hard to kind of judge and see where he falls into the group of quarterbacks this year. But how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of folks have had their various rankings come out. I did mine many months ago, and I'll probably have to update that once we kind of have some more clarity on some of these situations. I think Milton's, easily has a case to be in the top 5, but you're right, Jason, that there's a lot of projection among multiple SEC quarterbacks. I think Joe fits into that equation. A guy like Carson Beck at Georgia, who we've seen, also have success in mop-up duty, but hasn't, really been had his number called upon. How does a guy like Jackson Dart perform, at Ole Miss? Lane challenged him, I think, big time this offseason, bringing in Howard and Spencer Sanders, and Dart responded in the spring by basically kind of elbowing his way to keep that starting job. Connor Wegman at A&M, I think because there's so many unknowns, it's kind of like your favorite ice cream flavor. It just kind of depends on whether you're a strawberry guy or whether, you like cookies and cream. So I think there's a pretty clear demarcation at the top where, if healthy, I would probably go KJ, Jaden Daniels, and probably even, honestly, if Devin Leary does what he did 2 years ago, those would be guys up there. But I think Joe Milton would have a case that by the end of the season he could be the best quarterback in the conference. I honestly think Carson Beck has that upside. And I think a wild card of the group is, kind of the forgotten man is Will Rogers at Mississippi State. I mean, yeah, he put up a bajillion yards and numbers in Mike Leach's offense. Going to be playing in a more pro style this year, but he has a lot of tools and he's played in a lot of SEC games. So it's a pretty interesting conference of quarterbacks this year, especially coming off, losing Bryce Young, Hendon Hooker, and the Stetson Bennett's of the world from recent seasons.
Jesse Simonton, On3.com here on Josh and Swain. The biggest storyline in the SEC is what, Jesse?
I don't know how it's not, multiple. I guess you could take it in multiple angles, but I don't know how it does not involve what is Alabama in 2023. Who are the Tide? What are the Tide? This is a team that last year was as talented as any in the country, and they had the best quarterback in the nation, arguably, returning. Obviously, Caleb Williams ultimately won the Heisman, but the number 1 quarterback and then the number 1 defensive player. And yet it wasn't enough. And that's because I think they were let down by the coaching staff. I think the roster, the way they've had to kind of pluck some guys from the transfer portal, has shown some holes in terms of player development. Lots of changes again this fall. They've kind of, dipped back into the well to kind of supplement some areas, specifically in the secondary and kind of elsewhere via the transfer portal. We obviously know they have 2 new coordinators. I think Kevin Steele's going to be fine. He speaks, Nick Saban's language. But kind of the machinations with Tommy Rees and what that quarterback room looks like, and the fact that there's so many variables there, and we really don't know, who is going to be the guy. A lot of folks, assume it's going to be Tyler Buckner because they had to go into the portal and get another body. But could Jalen Milroe, kind of catch Nick Saban's eye and become the guy? Could Ty Simpson, a former 5-star, ultimately kind of live up to that billing with another training camp? So I think any and all questions surrounding Alabama are going to be kind of the topic du jour next week in Nashville. And to double down on that, guys, I mean, I don't know what you guys have certainly I'm sure have talked about it. I think LSU is going to be the overwhelming favorite picked to win the West, but in the poll come weeks in.
Yeah, that's interesting. That seems to be the prevailing thought. Saban loves that if that is the case, right? If his team's not picked to win the West, I mean, what a dream scenario for him from a motivational try to get his team to rally standpoint.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's always, he loves the rat poison, and that's that's the rat poison for another team while he gets to tell his guys again. I mean, Alabama's going to return the number 1 roster in America just in terms of raw blue chip talent. They just signed the death of the Tide Death Star maybe has kind of shown some holes, so to speak. But this is Nick Saban just signed the number 1 recruiting class in history in 2023. So if they hit on the quarterback, this is a team I think that absolutely can get back to the college football playoff. But the fact that they haven't been there the last couple seasons, had did not even win the West a year ago, there's certainly going to be lots of folks kind of questioning where that program sits, in terms of, steady footing, entering 2023.
What about the receiver group, though, for Alabama? It felt like last year Bryce Young was putting the team on his back and didn't have much help from the receivers. He had help from the tight end and the running back, but not really from the receivers. How are they looking this upcoming season?
Oh, I think that's a huge question mark, Jason. I think that's huge. And you're right. I mean, Bryce had to be Superman a lot last year.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the concern for the Tide is that, he really did bail them out in so many situations. What happens when you take that equation away? I think I know that Alabama feels like they do have some real pieces at receiver. They just want some of these young guys to pop, whether it is a Brooks. I think that's a guy that they think is maybe going to take a leap this year. The addition of the tight end from Maryland, CJ Diffie, I think is going to be important. And honestly, I think part of the reason why Nick Saban was attracted to Tommy Rees is that, yes, they're going to be running the Alabama offense. He did that with Kiffin, Sark, Bill O'Brien, all these guys. They come in and they run the Alabama offense, but they didn't get to put their little fingerprints on it. Tommy Rees's fingerprints is that he has been very successful at Notre Dame at creating, a run game that really stresses opponents, and off that is using the play action passing game. So receivers don't have to quite, win at the line of scrimmage as much there. And you get to lean on what you think is a better offensive line. I think Justice Haynes is going to be a household name by season end, 5-star freshman running back. They have a bunch of other options with McClellan, Rodell Williams, and some other guys at tailback there too. So I think Alabama is absolutely going to run the ball more as they ease in some of these receivers because, last year that was not a position of strength, and now you take away a known commodity in kind of the all-world talent of Bryce Young. Like we mentioned, we don't really know what they have at quarterback, so to speak, thus far.
He has written a lot to lead up to next week's SEC Media Days event, and then there will be more coverage to come out of it with Tennessee being there on day 4 in Nashville. Jesse Simonton of On3.com. Go there to read his work. Jesse, we appreciate the time as always, and we'll do our best to catch up again next week over there in Nashville. Thank you for the time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.